Hey, what's up guys, this is Adi from ShastryNation, and today we're going to be talking about mitosis and meiosis. So now that you're back from the intro, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so let's first start with mitosis, because it's easier to explain, and also meiosis is based off of mitosis, so I guess we can start there. Alright, so some things that you'll need to know about mitosis. Mitosis is the replication and separation, or like the creation of two new cells from one cell. Okay, so it creates two new cells through replication. Okay. So, basically, if you haven't watched the, replication, transcription, and all that video, the replication video on DNA, I would go ahead and watch that. But basically what happens is replication happens and all of the organelles are also replicated and, basically, two new cells are formed. Right? Another thing you might have to know is that the amount of DNA in the, cell is 2n. 2n being that it has all 44 chromosomes, or 46. All of the chromosomes, basically, it has all of the chromosomes, so it doesn't, it's not lacking any. Another thing is that it's genetically identical to the parent cell. So it's basically genetically identical to the parent cell. Alright, so I guess we can start talking about the cell cycle. Alright, so the cell cycle. Alright, the cell cycle is basically like the life cycle of a cell. Alright, so I'm gonna draw a circle, I guess. That's a poorly drawn circle, but oh well. It gets the point across. Okay, so we have M phase here. Okay, we have G2 right here, S phase right here, and G1 phase right here. So it goes in a clockwise, so it goes like that basically, and then like this. Okay, so it goes in like a clockwise direction, and we'll talk about the different stages. All right. So first we also have growth 0 phase right here. Okay, so growth 1. What is growth 1? Let's go ahead and start labeling these. Okay, so growth 1. Growth 1 is like the first part where the cell actually starts to grow. So the cell is growing is what it will say. Okay, and then S phase. S phase is like the first part of, mitosis. It's where like DNA is replicated and things like that. And there's actually a checkpoint right here, at certain points in the life cycle of the cell to see, if it can go on to the next phase. So basically, S phase, what happens is the DNA is actually replicated. Yeah, so the DNA is actually being replicated. Okay, and over here in this checkpoint, what happens is that the cell will actually go ahead and check, if is all of the DNA actually replicated. And then if it is, it'll move on. If it's not, it'll stay in the same phase and it'll do whatever it has to before it can actually start. Before we move on, let's go ahead and talk about the G1 phase checkpoint. And so basically what will happen here is the cell will decide if, it can actually divide, if it has enough space, like if it has enough nutrients, food, if it has space, things like that, to actually go ahead and divide and to start mitosis, right? So then we have growth 2. So growth 2 is basically another stage where the cell is actually going to grow a little bit. So another growth cycle. Okay, so another growth cycle. this, basically the cell is just gonna grow, and it's not gonna, do anything. It's just gonna grow and try to get ready for the M phase. So the M phase is actually where all of the stuff actually happens. So the M phase is like mitosis phase. It's where actually all of the phases, the technical phases of mitosis happen. Okay, so what is G1? G0. Alright, so G0 is basically if the cell can't, it's like, oh, I don't have enough space to divide, or I can't divide, I don't have nutrients, things like that. The cell will actually go to G0, which basically means that the cell just does normal functions until it can get back into the cycle of things. Alright, so cancer cells, what will happen is that the checkpoints won't limit them. They'll just keep going, and they'll keep creating new cells. And so that's why cancer happens, basically. Alright, so let's get started with the phases of mitosis. Alright. Phases of mitosis. Alright, so the phases of mitosis. Okay, so an easy way to remember this is by using the acronym IPMAT. Okay, and so this will basically, it's just what happens in mitosis. Alright, so I would be interphase. And interphase isn't really a stage of mitosis, it's just a stage of the cell cycle. And so interphase is G1. This is when that happens, G1. And so basically the cell is getting ready and larger for mitosis to occur. Prophase is actually where everything starts to happen, and this would be where DNA is actually going to be replicated. So the DNA is going to be replicated. And this would happen in the S phase. Alright, G2 would, sorry. My bad. Alright, metaphase is basically when the chromosomes will line up in the middle. Okay, so you have like this, okay? And so all of the chromosomes are now put into, the DNA is being replicated, everything's done, and they're putting themselves into chromosomes. So you have like chromosomes here, like this, like that, okay, and they're gonna be lined up in the middle of the cell, and the cell's gonna be more like an oval, but for our purposes, we can just write it like that. Okay, anaphase. Anaphase is when it's actually going to start to split apart. So you'll have like some cells, chromosomes going here, some going here, depending on their location, things like that. And you'll have like microtubules trying to pull them apart, basically. And you'll start to see the split in the cell start to form, things like that. Alright? And then telophase and cytokinesis. Telophase and cytokinesis is basically when the cell's actually going to split apart and form two new cells with 2N DNA. Okay? So that's basically the brief overview of what happens in each of the cells. We can go really in depth, but that would take forever to actually explain everything because there's like 8 different steps in each one of those basic overview stages. Alright, so then let's see. We have meiosis versus mitosis. Let's go ahead and talk about that. Meiosis versus mitosis. Okay, so meiosis is basically going to be IPMAT times 2. Okay, so basically it'll go through the whole process, and then it'll go through it again, and we'll have 4 different cells. Okay, now basically all the stages are the same. You can't, if they told you, okay, if they gave you a cell that looks like this, and they gave you like mitosis, and they asked you, okay, if this is this mitosis 1 or metaphase 1 or metaphase 2, you wouldn't be able to tell because it's basically the same. Or, I mean, if they only gave you one, if you would be able to tell if they gave you 2 cells like this. And you'd be like, oh yeah, that's 2 different cells, so it's obviously mitosis metaphase 2. Alright, so not many changes in the overall process of what happens, but there is a change in in the fact that the cells aren't genetically the same. Cells the same. So cells aren't genetically the same. Alright, so yeah, they're gonna have different DNA inside of them, things like that. Okay, and this is just used for genetic variation, used to increase genetic variation. Alright. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the, briefly about what happens, what's different in meiosis rather, in mitosis. Alright, so instead of drawing out the chromosomes, I'm just going to write 2n. So basically 2n means that it has, like I've mentioned before, it has all of the sets of chromosomes, so all of the sets of chromosomes are in there, and it has all of the DNA, things like that, okay, and it'll function well. Alright. So, this will actually separate into two 2n cells. So this is basically the same thing as mitosis. This is mitosis. Okay, but it's called meiosis 1. So this is meiosis 1. Alright. But it's the same as mitosis, so don't get it confused, okay? So it's just gonna split up into 2n, both sides. Alright, and then these are actually gonna split up into n, so there's not going to be any replication here, so no replication. So there's no replication, alright? This one will actually split up into n and n. Okay, so n meaning it has half of the DNA. So if I wrote like 1/4 n, it would have 1/4 of the DNA, things like that. So it actually has half the DNA, and you have genetic variation here because the DNA in this cell might not be the same as the DNA in this cell and the DNA in this cell. You might have different things going on in different parts of the DNA of different cells, and that'll cause genetic variation when we put them together. Alright, so basically that's all I had to talk about for mitosis meiosis. I know that that's a really brief overview of it, but I could go on for about 2 hours if I talked about every single part of it, and a lot of it you don't even need. They won't ask you. You need to know the basic overview of what happens, how much DNA is put into each cell in each meiosis and mitosis, things like that, and the general overview of the steps and how to differentiate between the two, things like that. Alright, and the cell cycle. Alright. Let me go ahead and label out whatever you need to know. Okay, so mitosis, you'll need to know that it has, it creates 2 new cells. It's 2n. It has all of the DNA basically, and it's the parent cell and the daughter cell are genetically identical. Okay, the cell cycle, all of the stages. Okay, and the checkpoints in each of the stages. All right. The phases of mitosis would be, you need to know a basic overview of what the stages are. And also, I would memorize this, IPMAT. It's pretty cool. Okay. So then, the difference, you'd also need to know the difference between meiosis and mitosis, and how many stages there are. Okay. How to find the difference, like I did here. Basically, if it's meiosis, you're gonna have to have 2 cells. If it's meiosis 1, or like, metaphase 1 or something like that, you wouldn't be able to tell because it's only 1 cell, and it's basically the same as mitosis. But if you had 2 cells, you would know that it's meiosis. Right? You need to know. You also need to know like I mentioned before, how the DNA is actually put into the number of DNA and the amount of DNA. is put into each of the cells. So, and what that causes, things like that. Okay, and that's about it. That's all you need to know about mitosis and meiosis. This is like a very brief overview. There's a lot more stuff going on in these very complicated cycles of a series of events, I guess I can say. And yeah, I guess I can leave you at that. I hope it helped. If you like these videos, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and hit the like button, because it helps me out. And if you want me to talk about anything else in a future video, things like that, I do make these cool whiteboard videos every Friday. If you have any topics that you want me to do on any of those, it'd be great if you could leave them in the comments below, because I like making those. And yeah, I guess I can leave you at that. I guess I can see you guys on the next one.